All right, good evening, Energy Rogue Nation. Welcome back to another weather discussion. Thank you all so much for tuning in. It has been about a week or so since we last talked. It seems as though that's been the theme of the last couple of weeks, but the videos keep coming along. And for those of you that are subscribed to the Energy Rogue platform, you know that I haven't been gone for a week there. We've been posting some pretty frequent content, a lot more write-ups as of recently, but as I mentioned in the last video this past week, we will be doing a little bit of a mixture here going forward. So some written content. If there's a video not coming out, that's what we'll have. So it's going to be a nice little amalgam of different things. And so you can expect that when we're not doing a video, we're doing some written content. But again, it's going to be over on the Energy Rogue platform. If you're interested in signing up, energyrogue.com is the place to go. And there are many different tiers and options available to you, so be sure to check that out for more information. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the weather. How else do you put it? I mean, it has really been a pretty bizarre last couple of weeks in the weather world. I mean, just to kick things off, in January, we had some pretty significant wildfires across the Palisades and much of Ventura and Los Angeles County. And tonight, we've had several inches of snow across areas that historically, in the worst cases, have only seen maybe a few inches of snow. So this is a historical system that we're seeing across the Gulf Coast states and eventually making its way to the Mid-Atlantic tonight. We're still seeing some accumulating snowfall across these areas. And of course, honorable mention for the Midwest. We see a lot of this purple on the map, and you're probably wondering what that is. Well, really, it's a combination of current snowpack that's on the ground along with the cold air that's moving over top of it, right? So if we just kind of back up for a moment, we can see that across the Carolinas we have this large splotchy green that encompasses, once again, the Gulf, the Mid-Atlantic, and the southeastern United States, even extending up to the northeast. This is corresponding with a surface low pressure system that's right along the Gulf of Mexico tonight, and that's continuing to move off towards the north and east. As it does so, it is wrapping cold air around the backside, and anytime you have that interaction, you get the moisture on the south side, you get the northern flank being the colder air, those two features converge, and that's how you get that wintry precipitation. So we're seeing that across areas that we typically don't see that much snowfall for in a given year. And if you want another fun fact on this event, the Florida Panhandle is experiencing its first winter storm in 11 years. The Florida Panhandle, again, typically does not get this kind of snowfall, is under a winter storm warning, currently experiencing a winter storm for the first time in over a decade. So this is a pretty rare event. It's really by the books, a 1 in 10, 1 in 20 plus year event that we're seeing tonight. And that's expected to end as we get towards tomorrow and even into Thursday. But behind that, as I alluded to earlier, is this big area of cold air. And let's go ahead and actually illustrate this a little bit better here by looking at the 500 millibar jet. And you can see these jet stream winds pointing from the northwest. That is telling us that all that cold air from the poles is being advected south across the Midwest and even all the way up towards the plains, the northern plains, and even the Canadian border, the international border there between North Dakota and Manitoba. How about some Canadian trivia for you tonight, right? Had to make sure I remembered my provinces. But this cold air is going to continue for those same regions through tonight and even into the rest of the work week. But this whole pattern is expected to change as we exit out of January and enter into February. This has been a topic of conversation in the energy and commodity trading space of what February is going to look like. And there's been some folks in the Discord server that have given some speculative takes on what that could be. And we're going to highlight that a little bit more tonight. And this forecast, remember, for Tuesdays is focused on the United States. We'll be covering Europe on Thursday. Thank you to my European friends and a sincere apologies. I know we have not covered Europe as much as of late, and there's been a lot of headlines that have sort of intruded on the European discussion, so we've had to unfortunately postpone some of that talk, but we have kept our eyes on Europe, and it's been a relatively interesting season over the last few weeks and really over the last months. some pretty volatile weather across much of Western and even Eastern Europe. So let's get into the bulk of the conversation tonight, and that is where we're going, right? That's the current pattern right now. We're seeing a lot of this cold air really kind of baked into our weather over the next couple of days, but that's not going to really stick around as long as you might think. And so we'll begin by taking a look here at the GFS, and this is a map that I always like to look at. This is our jet stream map, and it needs no introduction at this point. I think I bring it up frequently. You probably already know by now, 500 millibar jet stream, but I'll always keep repeating it no matter what. So as you can see, right, we have a really broad area of cold air that has made its way across the plains, the Midwest, and by the way, the southern United States, let's not forget, over the last 24 hours. And a lot of this, really over the last few weeks, has been responsible for this upper level ridge out in the northern Pacific. And why that feature is important is because when you have ridging, so basically it looks like a ridge, taking place across the northern Pacific, that essentially allows for cold air, which typically circulates around the North Pole off the page, to then be displaced south and east across the contingent United States. And so, depending on how amplified your area of high pressure is, your upper level ridge, will also factor into the area of which will experience cold, right? So, you know, the more ample your ridge is, or the more amplified and elongated it is, the more cold air can be advected south, and thus the more people can be impacted. When you have a ridge that's a little bit more muted, then you tend to localize that to, you know, more of a regional or more of a typical regional area like the Midwest or the Northeast, which we would expect in a La Nina. But of course, over the last couple of weeks, we have not seen that happen. We've actually seen more of this amplified ridge, as you can see here on the GFS. But as I mentioned a few times already, that's expected to change. This high pressure has really acted like an accordion throughout the last month and a half, 2 months, right? We've had this period in the last few weeks of some elongated area of high pressure in the northern Pacific that's led to a lot of the cold air across much of the United States. But we've also had times, and think back to the beginning of December, where it was more contracted, right? We had more of this streamlined flow, meaning that we went from an elongated ridge to more of this zonal pattern, and that brings with it some milder temperatures. And so it looks as though we're going to be heading back into that early December direction, especially as we head into the next week or so. So once again, as we head towards Friday, you do see, once again, amplified ridge across the northern Pacific. That, of course, is going to lead to another revigorated punch of cold air across mainly the northern United States. This area of low pressure that begins to build by the time you get to Sunday should allow for some of that cold air to mainly be confined to the northern United States, which would then perturb any cold air from reaching places like Texas, Louisiana, and the Gulf Coast states during that span. So Midwest, Northeast should remain cold. Southern United States, they're going to be getting more of that Pacific air due to that low pressure that kind of disconnects from the main jet. And that's going to allow some of your temperatures to go and revert back to more of a milder regime as we head towards this weekend into early next week. And so that continues, right? We still see, as we head towards what would be next Thursday, a pretty amplified polar jet. We got a lot of cold air up here towards the northern Canadian provinces of Canada. That polar jet is still very strong because of that. And so the Northeast and the Midwest will continue to experience some of those colder temperatures. May not be as cold as what we've seen the last few days, but certainly could expect to see just continuation of those below normal temperatures. Meanwhile, same story exists here. Southern United States and the Gulf. Some of these cutoff low systems you can even see here by the time we get to next Saturday, really just blocking any of this cold air from getting further south, and thus, as I mentioned, keeping the South and the Southern United States pretty mild during that span. And of course, we head towards the beginning of February on the GFS. Some of these early initial runs are indicating what our climate models are showing, which is a continuation of milder temperatures, or somewhat mild across the Gulf, and then also some colder below normal temperatures continuing for the Midwest and Northeast. Now, interestingly enough, this would actually constitute a La Nina pattern. And as I mentioned in one of my responses to Tom, and by the way, Tom, shout out to you, my friend, great questions he's brought up the last few days on weather, is we are in a period right now where La Nina seasonally has reached its peak, and we are beginning to see that decay. And what that means for the weather pattern itself is a lot of these high pressures that continue to expand and contract, well, that will continue. However, we are going to see more of a Pacific jet influence, which will help to perturb some of that cold air from frequently coming as far south as the Gulf Coast states, like we've seen the last couple of weeks. So, really, when I say it's going to be likely a choppy February, it really is looking like that. It's a pretty mixed bag. I don't think it's going to be as consistent as what we've seen. And a lot of that is not just because of the model guidance that I'm seeing and the consensus, but it's also the fact that our current spread is showing that La Nina is expected to decay. La Nina is already a weak one as is. So if we continue to see that trend, that would then really sort of kind of complement more of a Pacific jet, which would then keep some temperatures mild across the southern United States and thus lead to a tale of two winters for February, where the northern United States remains cold, the south remains relatively at or slightly above normal. So if we take that over now to the climate models, I think this really illustrates it, right? And I want to show this from, once again, the jet stream perspective, but then tie in some of these temperature anomalies. And we are, excuse me, looking at the week to week, and we're looking at the CFS, right? So let's take this back to the first week. And as you can see, these purples are really showing you the amplified ridge that is the Northern Pacific. And so the darker purple you have, the more amplified the ridge is. Same thing goes for these blue colors. The darker blue you see, the stronger the low. That's the only difference. So your blues are corresponding to low pressure. Your oranges, your reds, your purples even are corresponding to high pressure. And so if we take this into February, again, this is week by week. This is the end of January. We go into the first couple weeks of February. Keep an eye on the Gulf of Alaska and the Northern Pacific. You see that ridge really begins to sort of decay over time, especially as we head into February 18th and then eventually into late February. Now, granted, these climate models certainly have their limitations. It's going out way far in advance, and as we know, models tend to not perform well the farther out you go. However, the one thing that climate models have done very well this season is give us a hint at what the weather pattern is going, or where we're heading in terms of a synoptic point of view. It may not be the best necessarily to look at temperature anomalies per se, but this really says it all, right? And this is indicating that we see more of a Pacific jet influence, which would constitute milder air, but then also we're seeing this ridge becoming less amplified, less intense, to where any cold air that were to take place and advect south. You're noticing a theme here, right? You could really just play a drinking game if you are of age. The north would then remain cold for the most part, and then the southern United States remain warm. Tale of two winters. I cannot stress that enough. That's something that I continue to see, and is something that I will not be shocked by if that happens. Because something also to note too, to see the type of amplification we've seen with this ridge over the last week and a half, 2 weeks, is incredibly anomalous, and it's not something that can keep up forever. So we are heading into February. Models are showing that decaying once again and flattening a bit, and that would then lead to more of a split flow pattern, a tale of two winters. So can't stress that enough. And I guess finally, I know I really kind of crapped on it, but let's just look at the 2 meter temperature, because I think this really brings home the point. If you weren't really following that jet stream discussion, I think this really drives it home. We start here that last couple weeks of January. Look what happens to your temperature anomalies over time, right? We really begin to see things warp up. And look where the emphasis is, just where we would expect it, right in the Gulf, slightly above normal for the Midwest and Northeast. And I think that for the CFS is a little bit too aggressive on the warm air, but notice how it has a really strong signal for the Gulf, and a lot of that playing into a weakening La Nina, more of a Pacific jet influence, a decaying of this amplified ridge that's caused a lot of this extreme cold across the United States, and thus a tale of two winters. So I hope that this provided some context for the next month, but I cannot stress enough, February looks to be, I don't want to say a lot different, but it's going to look different than what we saw in the month of January. And I would actually compare it to December, where December was also in the beginning kind of choppy. And it really, people were wondering about the winter season. Oh, here we go again. It's going to be a mild year. There was that thought that was taking place across the month of December. Things weren't really shaping up too well. And then January happened and caused some pretty severe cold. But I think February is going to look a little bit closer to December as opposed to January, where we are seeing more of this sort of choppy weather, right? Not very consistent like we've seen. And certainly, I would argue, in terms of consistency, more consistent depending on where you're at. Northern U.S. getting cold, Southern U.S. getting warmer. So hopefully that helps. If you have any questions, be sure to post those down in the comments below. Be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. And we'll see you on Thursday with another weather video. This time, finally, hopefully, for my European friends. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.